Toward the end of 2016, I spent 3 months with the Fuji X-T2 and I loved it. I even named it the best all-around APS-C mirrorless camera. If you haven't seen my full review of that camera, you can use the card pop-up above or use the link in the video description to check it out and see why I didn't end up buying one. Now this video isn't about the X-T2, it's the little brother of that camera, the X-T20, which I was luckily able to rent for a week since the camera with that 18-55 2.8-4 lens was back ordered everywhere. This is literally a mini version of the Fuji X-T2. It uses the same sensor, the same processor, and as far as I could tell, the photo autofocus is just as fast. The body is smaller and it's missing the ISO dial and metering selector switch as well as the joystick, but it makes up for that with a touchscreen, which is a first for Fuji. Just like the A6500, the touchscreen is somewhat limited in use. You can't use it in the menu, it's basically just for selecting your focus points. We're now limited to just one card slot and we're missing the horizontal adjustment of the rear LCD screen. But a huge deal to me is that they left in 4K recording with the same bit rates and frame rates as the Fuji X-T2. If you're a video shooter, this is going to be a huge selling point over, say, the Canon EOS M5 or M6. Starting off with build quality, the X-T20 feels very solid, far surpassing the EOS M5 and matching up with the X-T2, but lacking weather sealing. Moving on to ergonomics, the camera feels pretty good in the hand given the small size and almost non-existent grip. The thumb bumper really helps when holding it. Size-wise, it's similar to the A6500, just slightly taller and quite a bit smaller than the X-T2. The EVF is smaller than the X-T2's, but it's still usable with no lag. The eye cup is basically non-existent, so if you're shooting outdoors, you do get quite a bit of light leak. And because of this, it's very easy to accidentally touch the glass on the EVF and smudge it and leave fingerprints, which need to be wiped off. I didn't miss the ISO dial once I mapped it to the back dial so I can press down and select the right setting. I really wanted to map it to the front dial, but that is reserved for aperture control on lenses without an aperture ring. Most Fuji lenses include an aperture ring, so this front dial becomes pretty much useless. So I really wish they would allow you to use it for something else if you have a lens with an aperture ring. The X-T20 has a custom function button at the top corner of the camera, but it's almost flush with the top and very difficult to press, so I ended up not using it. The other major ergonomics problem is the battery and memory card compartment. Like the EOS M5, if you're using a video plate, the compartment is blocked, so you'll need to remove it each time you need to have access. This was really a major pain point for me. After the initial setup, you can mostly stay in the customizable quick menu, but unlike Sony, when you're recording video, this is locked out, so you'll have to end your clip first. Even though I mapped my ISO to a dial so I didn't have to access the quick menu, you still can change ISO while recording, just like the X-T2. So as far as ergonomics for video shooters, it's not great. What is good is the rear LCD, which is sharp and bright and works well outdoors, especially compared to the LCD that Sony uses. Another ergonomic pain is the 2.5mm mic jack, so you'll need to buy an adapter for most aftermarket mics or use Fuji's mini shotgun mic. The X-T2 is a great photo camera and so is the X-T20. There was something just really enjoyable with the X-T2, just really made you want to go out and shoot. I'm not sure if it's just the analog dials or something else, but I had this experience and so did my friend Dan from Learning Cameras. Most of the X-T2 magic is here in the smaller, cheaper body. The autofocus is just as fast and accurate, the JPEG images look just as good with a variety of film simulations, and of course the lens selection is just as nice. The phase detection system can automatically find and focus on faces, and it did a great job. The biggest gripe I had was the wide metering mode being a bit too sensitive compared to other cameras. So when shooting in auto ISO, one photo could be underexposed and the next slightly over. But I typically shoot in manual mode, so if you're like me, this won't be an issue. Noise performance is similar to the X-T2, which is good. I'm comfortable shooting up to 3200 ISO with JPEGs, but if you need to get the shot, you could definitely go higher and use some noise reduction in post. I won't stay on photo too long, but I will say that if you mainly shoot photos and want to save some money over the X-T2 or want a smaller body, you'll be very happy with the system. Quality-wise, it's just as good as the X-T2, and surprisingly, it still has the same frames per second as the Fuji if you don't have that extra grip. If you want a compact camera with fantastic image quality, really good out-of-the-box JPEGs that don't need additional editing, and fast, accurate autofocus, I would definitely suggest this camera. Now I want to touch on the 18-55 kit lens. Most kit lenses start at f3.5 and go up to either 5.6 or 6.3 when you zoom in, so they're pretty much useless indoors. On top of that, they usually aren't very sharp and have other image issues. This lens is not only 2/3 to 1 stop brighter, but it's also quite sharp for a kit lens. Autofocus was fast for photos and smooth for video, and the zoom range is very usable with a 27mm full frame equivalent on the wide end being enough for most people. You won't get the same portrait result as a fast prime, but at 55mm and f4, you can still get some decent subject background separation, especially if you set up your shot right. On top of that is the size and the price. At just $200 more than the cheaper kit, it's a no-brainer, and it explains why this kit is sold out basically everywhere, while the body only and the cheaper kit is available in a few places. Most non-pro shooters won't want to spend $1,200 on the 16-55 2.8 lens, and it's also quite a large lens, so the f2.8 to f4 is a perfect fit for most. That, paired with a single prime lens like the 35-1.4 that I used, or a cheaper alternative, will be enough for most casual photographers. Finishing off with the kit lens and moving into the video section, the only issue I found with the lens was the image stabilization. While it works well for handheld, it was freaking out on me when I used it on a gimbal or a tripod. I couldn't tell that it was being weird on the rear LCD, but when I started editing the footage, it's clearly visible and it ruined a lot of my shots. Now I know it's not recommended to use image stabilization when you're on a tripod, especially if you're going to be panning, but I typically leave it on because with most other lenses they don't have issues. With this one, it definitely is an issue. Now, like a tripod or a gimbal or anything else like that, there's specific tools for stabilizing your camera, so you don't need to have image stabilization on. So the main point is don't forget to shut the IS off if you're using that kit lens. Just like the X-T2, the little brother also has a 10-minute time limit when you're shooting 4K, but unlike the X-T2, there's no battery grip that can extend your shooting, so you're going to have to be resetting your clips when you get close to that 10-minute limit. The HDMI output does have a 4K clean output, so you can record to an external recorder to bypass that 10-minute limit, but unlike the X-T2, Fuji does not include F-Log with this camera. As far as 4K quality, it looks quite good. I didn't have an X-T2 to test side by side, but from what I've seen online, the X-T2 is slightly more detailed, but the X-T20 has the advantage of no extra crop in 4K, which is nice. I mainly use the Provia and Astia picture profiles. The colors look nice without needing additional adjustments. Just like the X-T2, there's a lot of contrast to most of the profiles. I set the shadow to +2 for many of my shots, and looking back, I probably should have set it to +4, but that's up to your preference. Fujifilm offers a variety of profiles including Pro Neg Standard, which is good for grading but doesn't offer any additional dynamic range in my previous tests with the X-T2, and F-Log, which does, isn't offered on this little camera. Lowlight seems to be very similar to the X-T2 with about 6400 usable in photos and about 3200 in videos, at least to my standard, so your noise tolerance may be different than mine. Now, one thing to note is that the contrast is really high in a lot of the profiles and the Fuji does tend to underexpose, so that extra contrast kind of crushes the blacks and hides noise, which is a good thing, but then you do lose dynamic range. If you're going to be using a flat profile or bumping your shadows higher, you'll notice more of the noise. In regards to video autofocus, I had a subscriber contact me and let me know that the X-T20 does not use phase detection when in video mode like it does when it's in photo. Now this did have me worried, and once I received my rental, I started testing that out first and I was pleasantly surprised. Without phase detection, we don't have face tracking capabilities, which does suck, and we also don't have touch to track focusing, which is a disappointment because other cameras do offer this and it is quite useful. But overall, the video autofocusing does work really well, especially for a contrast-based system. With the Fuji X-T2, one of my biggest wishes is that it had a touchscreen, so it's really nice that Fuji decided to put one into the X-T20. It's really easy to change your focus by tapping on the screen or selecting a section for it to stay focused on, but like I mentioned, you can't touch an object and have the camera track it. The camera does quite good of a job figuring out what you want to be in focus, and it doesn't have the same issue that other contrast detect cameras have of randomly shifting focus to the background. I could change my framing around and the camera would still hold until the subject is on the very edge of the frame, and it would stay focused on the background until a subject moved towards the center, which is nice. The X-T20 does have multiple focus options to change the sensitivity and response delay, but there's no way to change the focus shifting speed, which is unfortunate. I found it a bit inconsistent, where it would focus nice and smooth on one touch to focus, and the next change would be very fast and unnatural. The video autofocus is impressive for a contrast-based system and is quite usable overall if you know its limitations. It's a step above Panasonic and Olympus offerings, but a step behind Canon and Sony, which can both touch to track objects and change focus speed. Manual focusing with Fuji lenses really depends on the lens. It seems like the newer lenses are nice and smooth and responsive, where the older lenses are less smooth when you're adjusting focus. The 35 1.4 was usable, but it wasn't great, and the kit lens was nice and smooth. Just like Sony, the Fuji lenses are focused by wire. You don't have direct connection with the glass, so it's harder to repeat focus moves compared to a manual lens. Luckily, Rokinon makes a wide variety of lenses for this camera system, so if you like to shoot with manual focus, I would suggest getting a few of those lenses. Personally, I have lenses that I use for autofocus and others that I use for manual focus, so I can get the best of both worlds. One pain point is the base ISO of 200 in video. When you're in photo mode, there is a lower 100 ISO that it electronically uses, but in video that's not an option. So if you like using fast prime lenses like I do, you're gonna have to use NDs if you're in bright environments. The last thing that I want to touch on is in-body image stabilization. IBIS has hit the market hard the last few years, and it seems that most mirrorless camera manufacturers are implementing IBIS in their cameras other than Fuji. IBIS isn't necessary, but it's really nice to have, and now that I've shot with a lot of cameras that does include it, it definitely is noticeable going back to Fuji that doesn't offer it. The kit lens does have image stabilization, so that's not a problem, but the 35 1.4 doesn't offer it, so it definitely would have been nice to have IBIS to stabilize that lens when shooting video. Some of Fuji's zooms don't have image stabilization like their 16 to 55 2.8, which is a really nice lens. So if you're a video shooter, I would keep that in mind. Fujifilm put out a statement that their mount system isn't compatible with IBIS. I really hope that this was just an excuse and they find out a way to get around whatever limitation is there. It's not really a big downside yet, but I think in the future when most brands are going to offer IBIS, that's definitely going to be a big disadvantage for Fuji. If you like to shoot video, especially handheld, I would keep this in mind, and especially if you want to use manual lenses or prime lenses without stabilization, I would definitely consider maybe getting a different camera for this reason alone. While this camera isn't perfect, it's a great all-around camera, especially if you're mainly shooting photos. It's compact, which is nice for casual users, and the added touchscreen makes it easier to use with a smaller body. The image quality and focus is just as good as its bigger brother, so if you're on a budget, the X-T20 kit is a great buy over the larger X-T2. For casual video shooters, especially those that mainly shoot photo but want to have video capabilities for shooting their family or travel, the X-T20 will also do a good job. But if you're somebody who wants to make money shooting video, I would suggest looking at other options like the Sony a6500 or the upcoming GH5. I hope this video has been helpful, and if you decide to buy an X-T20 or even an a6500, I would appreciate if you can use the links in the video description. We get a few pennies on the dollar when you buy something and it doesn't cost you any extra, and that supports our channel. If you really enjoy our videos and you want to support us on Patreon, you could do so for a few bucks a month and get extra bonus exclusive content. If you enjoyed this video, hit that like and sub button to see more in the future. This has been Max, and I'll see you in the next one.